Well, first of all, happy birthday. Happy birthday. 135 years ago, this very day, on August 11, 1878, Good Shepherd Church was consecrated. Now, I can't cover 135 years of history, but I did want to make some notes of some highlights in this amazing, amazing church. I found, to my great delight, that we still had, although it was burned around the edges, this wonderful history that was written by Mary Ann Oliver for the centennial. And actually, the notebook itself was plastic and it was sealed together. And it looked like a big piece of charcoal, but I cut it open and the pages were burned, but the text was untouched. So I'm going to refer to several things that she said that were really amazing. She said that actually it was 1865 that a little mission was started in a schoolhouse right at Virginia in San Pablo, and that a little church was started at that point. But in 1877, the women of this church determined they had to have their own church building, and they started a sewing society specifically to raise funds to build the church. Well, they also put an advertisement, an invitation in the Berkeley Advocate that invited all the people of Berkeley to come to this little schoolhouse and come to a service to sort of kick off the campaign. She notes that Reverend A.A. McAllister, who had recently been released from being a Navy chaplain, it doesn't say why he'd been released from doing that, held this first service. And it must have been pretty successful because in the Berkeley Advocate it notes, rumor number 13, that an Episcopal interest is springing up and attracting many of various shades of belief. So nothing much has changed in that. So she writes, with dizzying speed, our intrepid Reverend A.A. McAllister completed raising the funds not only to buy the lot at 9th and Bristol, now 9th and Hurst, but also to fund the whole building of the church. This is quite amazing, but this is what it says. The contractor was selected in June, and the building was completed in August. I wish we could move that fast right about now. And so, on Sunday, August 11th, at 3 o'clock, the church was consecrated by the first Bishop of California, William Ingraham Kipp. The Berkeley Ferry made a special trip, bringing people over from San Francisco, Bishop Kipp, and many others. It was reported to be a solemn and beautiful occasion, with Bishop Kipp and many other ministers processing down the aisle during the recitation of the 23rd Psalm. Well, I thought it was interesting to note that this miracle of instant church raising was done by very, very ordinary people. A. Ramelsburg, the Berkeley Ferry superintendent. S.A. Penwell, a school teacher. H.R. Marquand, editor of the Berkeley Advocate, and many women as well, including Mrs. S.A. Penwell, wife of the manager of the Berkeley Land Trust, and Mrs. Mary Josh, who became famous for offering $10, a lot of money in those days, for the arrest of any of the children who routinely trespassed on her property. In 1882, a 1,000-pound bell, West Berkeley's first, was installed in the bell tower of Good Shepherd Church, and it was used by the fire department until 1894. It was first rung for a New Year's Eve service during a snowstorm that yielded 4 inches of snow. By this time, the Reverend G.A. Easton was installed, the first vicar to actually live in Berkeley. And in 5 years, he baptized 65 people, presented 20 for confirmation, celebrated 12 marriages, and buried many parishioners for various reasons like measles, insanity, malpractice, and a fall from a horse-drawn buggy. Through the many years after this, the very familiar lament of building projects that were underfunded are noted. In 1957, the church was described as, quote, a crumbling shell. Somehow the funds were raised to fix it, and then it's noted it once again needed repairs and painting in 1967. Now, entirely absent from the account by Mary Ann Oliver is anything about the tumultuous 60s. But luckily, there was an addendum to her history written by Dick Snyder, who was a seminarian here in 2003. I read that in 1961, the Reverend Grant Muse, who hailed from Kansas and actually studied at CDSP and Yorkshire, England, was called. By this time, our intrepid deacon, Teddy Knight, was also a good shepherd, so I have some first-person accounts. The congregation was about 80% black, and there were some very notable black parishioners here, including Bill Carrington, General Secretary of the local NAACP, and Wiley W. Manuel, the first black California Supreme Justice. I heard elsewhere that in those days, Sacramento was a racial dividing line, and that very few people, white people, lived west of Sacramento, and it was impossible for a black family to even purchase a house east of Sacramento Street. Well, by 1961, the Reverend Grant Muse joined the ranks of the Freedom Riders. He was arrested along with others for, quote, disturbing the peace in an all-white bus terminal in Jackson, Mississippi. He was arrested with many others for a month, and for a month, he performed services in that jail. He later returned in 1965 and survived the famous march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. In 1963, Eleanor Bliss, a longtime Good Shepherd member, began a preschool program here in our parish specifically to improve the educational chances of at-risk children. Eleanor's program was the inspiration and model for the National Head Start program that's helped generations of children in need. In 1967, Good Shepherd started a program for the at-risk youth as well. Now here's a really interesting footnote that I have not found in any of the histories, but Teddy Knight told me this, and David Romaine from St. Augustine told me this. St. Augustine's on Telegraph Avenue was an all-black Episcopal church at the time. The two of these people swear that the Black Panthers began as an Episcopal youth group. Would you have imagined such a thing? Anyway, they grew up a little ways, they left high school, and they got a lot more militant, but they still were very concerned with community action and helping children in need. And so the Black Panthers started the first really effective free breakfast program for children. They tried it out at St. Augustine's, it worked pretty well. We were the only other integrated Episcopal church in Berkeley, so they wanted to move into Berkeley and they started doing it right here. Teddy told me that they would fix these nice, nutritious breakfasts, and then the kids would get out of their school bus, get a nice breakfast in here, and then go on their way. There was one little problem, though. When the Black Panthers would serve these nutritious breakfasts, they also would hand out not only Chairman Mao's Little Red Book for the children, but also special Black Panther coloring books that included such images as happy school children with guns pointed at police. Well, this would have been okay for the Black Panthers program, but they also had posters that they placed around the parish hall. So Sundays, when the children came for Sunday school, the Sunday school teachers, including Eleanor Bliss, would carefully take the posters down, and then during the week, Black Panthers would put the posters back up. Good Shepherd started this program, Project Nitty Gritty, Teddy told me, to sort of be a copycat youth group to Black Panthers. And the only reason I sort of believed this initially was that I've started a number of youth groups, and traditionally they name themselves, and it's always something like the Worship Wolverines, or maybe the Black Panthers. In 1972, we had the Reverend Esther Davis here, and I believe she was the first female deacon in the Episcopal Church in our country. She was serving a Good Shepherd, and she was an anti-war activist. And a few years later, when she was a little unsteady on her feet, she was wearing metal leg braces. But by God, she went to an anti-war protest and sat down, leg braces and all, right in front of the door of the induction office. Well, there was a supervising officer who talked to the officers on the street and said, "Arrest anyone who is obstructing the door to the induction office." And reportedly, this cop took one look at Esther with her leg braces and her collar and radioed back, "I ain't gonna arrest no crippled nun." In 1983, our own Bill Countryman touched down at Good Shepherd and gave us an interesting snapshot. He said the congregation was very friendly and very radical and integrated and consisted of 6 or 7 women in their 70s or 80s. He had a deep feeling of being in the right place at the right time. And so he immediately left and went somewhere else for 3 years. Blessedly, he came back and joined us for good. In 1993, the diversity of the congregation was again noted by longtime parishioner Joyce Schnobrecht. She said there was everything from Holy Hill professors to homeless people to indiscriminate people that she said possibly could have been considered Berkeley bag ladies. So imagine her amazement when she showed up to church and one of these bag ladies was vested and presiding at the altar. There was also a plethora of wildly creative clergy and clergies-to-be, such as the artist, musician, and visionary Red Stevens, the musician and liturgist Elizabeth Smith, and a pair of vastly talented writers and professors, the Reverend Doctors Bill Countryman and Jay Johnson. M.R. Ridley of blessed memory was here as well. It was all presided over by the beloved deacon in charge, Kathleen Van Sickle, who remained for 14 years. Starting in 1994, there was a sustained effort to develop a liturgy for same-sex blessings. And this effort culminated with the blessing on December 4th, 1994, of the union of the Reverend Kathleen Van Sickle and her longtime partner, the Reverend Barbara Hill. Then in 1998, the whole congregation with clergy leadership began to develop a very different, lively and creative and new liturgy, possibly looking forward to a new prayer book, that sought to express the theology of Good Shepherd. And gender-neutral language for God was incorporated, which had been a tradition for quite a while, as well as many beautiful Eucharistic prayers. Then in the early 2000s, the acceptance of James Trammell into the congregation was, I thought, an amazing example of the radical inclusiveness of Good Shepherd Church. Many members remember that he preached from prison over the phone, and they would hear his sermons coming over the phone line with loud beeps punctuating every few minutes. From 2001 to 2004, the Amazing Sheep of Good Shepherd started a campaign called Sheep with a Mission. And incredibly, they raised all the money they needed, both for a magnificent new paint job, 5-color paint job, and a completely new roof for the church. Well, as you all know, we are now mounting a similar campaign with a lot of help from the church insurance group. You might say we've gone from sheep with a mission to Phoenix with a problem. But fear not, little sheep. There have been losses and changes and blessings and unimagined miracles all through the 135 years of our history. We are right now, I think, in a very significant chapter of our history. And probably never before have we celebrated this birthday in a building that was not our church. As almost all of us know, last year, October 20th, our beautiful church was devastated by an electrical fire. This occurred on a Saturday night, and by Sunday morning, we were all set up for worship right here in this parish hall, where we've been ever since. Bishop Mark Handley Andrus apparently raided the cathedral in the middle of the night and brought us candlesticks and vestments and bulletins and everything that we needed for worship, because everything we needed for worship had been burned. The firemen were still working through the night. They were still here in the morning. And we brought them forward to be blessed and thanked here in front of the altar. The bishop assured us from that very first morning that we will rebuild our beautiful church. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Indeed, by faith, our ancestors received approval. Well, as with all the other challenges over 135 years, we know that God will take care of us. Our ancestors, it would seem, did have an abundance of faith, and they certainly were rewarded. We need only remember how many times we were out of money, how many times our numbers dwindled, how many times it seemed that our beautiful church was in peril. Jesus tells us, oh so gently, in our gospel reading, "Do not fear, little flock, for it is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Well, we've already sold our possessions thanks to our fundraiser, Where Your Treasure Is, which, by the way, is helpfully cited in our reading today. But one of the many gifts we have received from our unexpected fiery visitation was that it woke us up. It forced us to be dressed for action and to keep our lamps lit, although within code safety standards. We awoke to see that we could continue everything unimpeded, even though the place that we considered to be the center of our worship was utterly gone. We woke up to the fact that the church is not the building. The true church remained completely undamaged. The true church is within us and among us. Do not be afraid, little flock. Amen.